Hi everyone, and welcome to day 4. And today we're going to be thinking about industry, occupations, and interesting people in your place of study. Don't worry if you're only just joining us now. We're recording all the talks, and everything could be caught back up on afterwards, of course, so you can come and take part at your own leisure. For me, this is one of the things that really interests me about a place. And if you go back to what we were thinking about the other day, why do you choose a place of study? For me, one of the things that really drives my interest is what people did for work, for a living, but also what went on around them as well, what kind of industry occurred. And of course, by industry, we're taking that very, very broadly, the things that people have done with their hands or with machines to make things, produce things, the things that we eat and wear and all of those kind of things. And we're asking you on day 4 to think about industry and occupations and thinking about things like pay and conditions and the details of this as well, because it's all very well getting something like a census record and the occupation or something like that being listed, but what did that actually mean? And of course that can mean very, very different things. To be a miner in one place would be very different to being a miner in a different place, for example, depending on the type of mining, the kind of what was being dug out, the company that you might have worked for, as well as, of course, all of the different occupations within that, and was that person doing that job all the time, or was it just that was the job that they were doing at the point at which the census recorded it? So there's lots and lots of interest, I think, in digging into what this looked like, and especially when we think into sort of 19th, 20th century history as well. Thinking about women, what work did women do, and how did the coming of women into the workforce formally affect things, and of course was recorded. But I think it's important as well that we think before that, women have always been key parts of the workforce, have always been involved in industry. Women have always had occupations, even if they couldn't list them in the same way that men could. Ruth, I don't know if you've got any thoughts to share about researching industry and occupations for people who are taking this task for day 4.
I think we've got some talks coming up during today about plenty of different industries and occupations. Mike Esbest is talking to us later on about railways, which again impacts what we were talking about yesterday. And then we've got architects and
got pottery, haven't we? I'm sure we've got some talks on pottery. I'm sure that's
pottery, yeah.
Children in pottery.
Yeah, and then Anne Simcock talking about the drivers of industry and the people who were responsible for creating those industries and driving them on, and they were the ones that were setting the pay and conditions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect of the different occupations within an industry and how they might have been paid differently, or people being treated differently or thought of differently in a kind of social historical context as well.
And I know in some occupations it was basically the whole family who were employed, wasn't it? It might only be the head of the family who was listed on the census as doing the occupation, but the pay was actually for the whole family, and they were all expected to get involved.
Yeah, I have straw platters in my family history, and they very much would have all worked together on different elements of straw platting and then pooled their wages, not just from household to household, but potentially entire families spread out across different households. In fact, if you're ever lucky enough to go to Hatfield, there's a really good straw plaiting museum somewhere there that I visited years and years ago. So.
Excellent. I like that we're giving people holiday advice as well. So
we like to be inclusive. We like to be as possible in our advice.
Absolutely. While we're on it, go to a living museum as well. That's one of my favourite things to do if you're thinking about industry and occupation, somewhere like Beamish up in County Durham, West Country Living Museum, something like that, to really immerse yourself in the trades and the industrial landscapes of what people would have done in the past.
There are some online straw plaiting workshops as well for those people with straw plaiting ancestors. So I had a go at it myself recently, and it is very therapeutic. One of those tasks you can really sort of relax while doing. So it's certainly worth having a go at aspects of your ancestors' occupations. I think lace making is on my list to try. So that's something I'd like to do. And certainly in Devon, you get whole villages where, it wasn't just the women that were involved in lace making, as you might assume, but, men were involved in it as well. It was a real cottage industry. And, you know, some of the schools there were lace making schools. So it's very interesting to look at, you know, I know this is one of the things that Anne looks at in her Drivers of Industry presentation, is that different areas and the geology and geography of different areas give rise to different occupations. So, you know, and certainly, I suppose for me, the first glimpse of the occupations in my place were through looking at the census and just eyeballing it and seeing who did what. And you know, it can be quite illuminating to see how people were engaged in different occupations and who, you know, where they might have gone. You know, if somebody was an agricultural labourer, can you identify the nearby farms? Where were they likely to have worked? Bearing in mind that people could have walked several miles a day to get to work. You know, it's worth casting your net wide and just sort of seeing, you know, were they arable farms? Were they, you know, what went on those farms? So once you start digging, there's all sorts of things you can find out.
Yeah,
I did some work for looking at my sister's house actually in Epsom, and it was built just before the big asylum was built for the London overspill. And it was fascinating. The first census that the house appeared on, that house and all the neighbouring houses were occupied by builders, electricians, carpenters, and they'd clearly all come to work on building these big asylums. 10 years later, the asylums are open and all the houses are occupied by nurses and people in the care workers of various descriptions. And so tell what's going on in the place by the occupations you find.
Definitely. I found the same during the 1871 census, or when in Dunster, the Dunster Castle was remodelled by an architect called Anthony Salvin. And you can really see difference in the sort of level of occupations. There was a much greater increase in plumbers, plasterers, builders. And, you know, to start with, you know, why is this? What's happened to cause this influx of people with these particular trades? And then I realised that the castle had been remodelled during that time. So, you know, it's one of the beauties, I suppose, of doing a one-place study is marrying sort of the very local history with the people and, you know, what's going on in the local area as well.
Brilliant. I think you've touched on something good there to lead us nicely on, Liz, to interesting people. So who is this person then that for you had this impact then in Dunster? Because we want to think about interesting people who are in your place, not necessarily because they might be world famous, but because they're interesting individuals. Maybe they've done something important, they've had an impact on your study or the wider world somehow. So who is this architect then?
The architect was a chap called Anthony Salvin. As far as I know, he wasn't a Dunster man. He was somebody who had been employed by the Luttrells, who were the local landowning family, to come along and make some, you know, some alterations to the castle. The castle did look quite different afterwards. But I think for me, that's the beauty of a one-place study. There's a saying that history remembers the great and the good, whereas genealogy remembers them all. And one-place study is a glorious mix of both. So for me, in my one-place study, there might not be anybody particularly famous. I can't think of anybody there that if I gave you their name, you'd have heard of them. But there are people there who were definitely key players in the village, people who within that village, if you said their name, you know, everybody would have known who they were. And I think that's the, you know, one of the good things about a one-place study is you can see the impact that different people would have had. And they're not necessarily, you know, the wealthiest people. It might be perhaps the local doctor who everybody's heard of, or, you know, the local chemist, or the lady that was always there with people when they died. You know, it's those sort of people, I think, you know, notable people, but not necessarily lofty and great, who are also interesting to investigate.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to phrase it. I think it's the people that are interesting within that particular community. And this is one of the wonderful things, of course, about a place-based study, is that you can think about people that maybe were born somewhere, passed through, visited. I think there are probably 100 plaques across England of places that Charles Dickens spent one single night or something, or, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, what the connection is, and of course that can be really quite revealing about a place in a particular time. You know, why people came in, why people visited, why people left. So I think that's really valuable. And for those of you taking on this task at home, I think that's important to think about, who are the interesting people within the community, who were the important people in the community at that time. And I think that's a really good way to approach this task.